morning, all. Thanks for joining. My name is Zach Hodson. I work for the Salvation Army in New York, and I get to co-chair the New York City VOAD Board of Directors with Io Harrington from LES Ready. That is a privilege. I'm not going to say much other than thanks so much for coming. I think the number of folks already joined shows us how important it is for us to have tried to pull this together, and we're grateful for our partners with the Department of Health, with SBP, with NISM for being willing to share with us this morning. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Arnett from New York City Department of Health, who will start with some introductions of our presenters, and we'll get moving on the material you came to see.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see a lot of familiar names and names I don't know, which is always exciting. New folks to be able to partner with. First of all, I just want to reiterate what Zach said and say thanks to everyone for that worked with us to develop this workshop. This started as a conversation that came out of the committee work that New York City VOAD was doing, and a question about mold health, and it's grown into this. So we're really excited to do this and work with you all. So this morning we have Maureen Little with us from the health department. When we were asked a question about mold,
I appreciate it.
If everyone can mute, that would be really great. Thank you. So when Richard asked me a question about mold health that came out as a committee work, I was excited to find at the health department. We have lots of expertise about that. And Maureen Little, who's with us this morning, is a toxicologist from the health department who has a lot of mold expertise, including doctoral work, and that includes fungal allergens, which I was very excited to find out. So she's with us this morning to talk about the impacts of mold health. And we have Angela Calabro, who is from St. Bernard Project, who is going to be talking to us about some ways to work through recovery resources. And then we have Jill Cornell from NISM that's going to be with us to point us to resources for those who need more information. And all of us are available after this workshop to be able to answer more questions if we don't have time to fit everything in today. But for today, we ask you, while the presentations are happening, if you could please put your information, your question, in the chat bar. And in the Q&A session that we have after the presentations, we will try to address your questions in order. And if there's additional time, people can just freely ask them. But again, we just ask that you hold your questions until the presentations are through. If you want to go ahead and put them in the chat bar, that's fine. But that's just so we can move through these and have time for everyone's information to be shared. So excited again to work with all of these partners. A lot of us have known each other for a long time, since Sandy days, and it's never good to be having more of these types of disasters in New York City, but it's really great that we have so many of us that I think have done this work, a long time and can really work together with you all as fellow practitioners to serve the folks of New York City. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Maureen, and then we'll have Angela and then Jill and then the Q&A session. So thanks, Maureen. You want to jump in?
I hope I am sharing correctly. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I think I am too far ahead of my slides. Let's see, I can't just pause share for a second. All right. Sorry, technical problems, and it keeps jumping ahead. All right. So flood damage and mold, now that I'm finally ready to actually present. Again, I'm Maureen Little from the Environmental Disease and Injury Prevention Program from the New York City Department of Health. So floods, why we're here today. Mold can be caused by many things, but one of the big factors are floods. Floods, as you undoubtedly know, cause physical damage and structural damage. They can wipe out bridges, they can destroy houses, as we saw during Ida, and they might also cause contamination from chemicals, petroleum, pathogens, such as bacteria and various other materials. That you may remember a lot of sand came in during Hurricane Sandy. But the chemicals and petroleum, pathogens, things like that are especially problematic if there was sewage mixed in with the flood waters, which is very common. Most importantly, floods make everything very wet, which leads to mold, and it leads to, it attracts pests. So this is not a presentation about pests, but pests and structural damage are also, and sewage concerns are also always a problem with floods. And I wanted to mention them. Water attracts things like mice, insects, mites, even rats. But there also can be more, if there was structural damage to the property, then you might also have more areas of entry for pests. And that is moving on to So what is mold? Mold is a multicellular fungus. There are many types of fungus, such as mushrooms, yeast, that we encounter frequently, but mold is usually small. It's usually on a structure or a wall or a fruit. They're a large and diverse group of fungi that result in discoloration and a fuzzy appearance, especially on food or walls. And they're a natural part of our environment and present at some level in every home. So every home will have many different types of mold spores. It's natural. It's actually important for our microbiome in the home and for the environment. However, this is also a reason why we don't advise testing for mold, because if you test for mold, you will find mold. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem, but if you see it on the wall, that's a problem. Mold causes biodegradation of natural materials, so food spoilage or damage to property. It's eating whatever it's living on. So if it is on a piece of fruit, it's eating that fruit. If it's on the wall, it's eating the paint or the paper or whatever is on that wall. It only grows. So you may have mold spores in your home, but it only really grows, and that is the problem when there's a consistent source of water. In normal circumstances, that can be excessive humidity or leaks from plumbing, but in this case, it's a wet home after flooding. It comes in a wide range of colors, but for remediation purposes, all are equal. Black mold is not necessarily more dangerous than pink mold or green mold or gray mold. And if you have mold, you probably have many different species of mold. It's not necessary to know what kind of mold you have. It's not necessarily to know what color of mold you have. We want to get rid of the mold. That's the purpose. One thing I forgot to mention is that people often mention mildew and differentiate between mildew and mold. Mildew is a type of mold. It's a very generic term. I don't usually use it. It is essentially mold. And people have different definitions. So if you're thinking mildew, just think that's just another kind of mold. So mold is, there are different kinds of health effects. There are the routine health effects of mold, and there are more serious health effects. Many people have no health effects from mold. They can go into a moldy space, they may notice an odor, but they don't have any health effects from it. It's just mold. But other people are sensitive to mold, and they may find it irritating, or they may have allergy to mold. And they may experience runny nose, itchy eyes, congestion, or similar cold-like symptoms when in a moldy environment. And I do want to mention that all over the internet there are things about toxic molds or molds that do amazing things. Those are generally resulting from eating mold. consuming it if it gets in the food supply. And those can cause very serious intoxications or illnesses. But inhaling mold generally results in mild or temporary symptoms for most people. And these are much different than if you eat something. So we can get more into that if you have questions. Sorry. For people, however, with underlying conditions, the effects of mold may be more serious. People with respiratory or lung conditions, including asthma and COPD, may have worsening symptoms with mold exposure. And by that, I mean increased wheeze, increased chest tightening, shortness of breath, coughing. And many asthmatics are allergic to various mold species, which can lead to asthma exacerbations. Another group of people that are of concern are people on immunosuppressant medications or undergoing certain medical procedures, such as a bone marrow or organ transplant or chemotherapy. They are particularly at risk for more severe mold-related illness. And that is a major concern for hospitals, for example, who do bone marrow transplants. Is there mold present? Because that could be life-threatening. So moving on from health, and again, I'm happy to answer questions at the end. But what are our goals for remediation after a flood? Well, we want to remove or clean damaged or contaminated material. We want to contain the contaminants to the work area. We don't want to spread any contamination from the work area to other parts of the house or other parts of the apartment. And we want to protect yourself, your family, and workers from exposure. And on completion, have a clean, dry home in good repair and free of visible mold or damage. So fashion always being important, at least for some of us. What should you wear? Wear washable work clothing and sturdy boots. Don't wear open-toed shoes, especially if you're going to be doing any structural work or there may be nails. You don't want to accompany your mold cleanup with a visit to the emergency room. Wear waterproof gloves, for example, those that you use for dishwashing. Those are great. And an N95 respirator. Not the cloth kind that we're all wearing or the paper kind that we may be wearing, but an N95 respirator. And that's because of dust generally, not just because of the mold, but also because of other dust that you may be generating when you're doing cleanup or renovation type work. Those were in very low supply during COVID. I think they are more available now and can be found at hardware or home improvement stores. Also, it's a good idea to wear eye protection, such as goggles or safety glasses, especially if you're doing dusty work or work with a lot of debris. So, I think I jumped ahead. I think I am using an old slide deck, so I will talk my next slide. I'm sorry, I will send that later. Some non-mold issues to consider, and again, I'll send these links because I have several links on this slide. It's very important to control the dust. Anytime you're doing work, you want to control work or dust and use safe work practices. EPA has a program on lead and doing renovation, repair, and painting. It is on the EPA website, and that is mainly focused on doing lead or work with homes where there may be lead. However, those are good practices to use in any situation. Another issue are potential for lead hazards. Many of the homes in New York City are built before 1960 or at least before 1978 when city and state lead laws went into effect, banning lead-based paint. If you don't know if a building, especially a 1 or 2 family home, was built before 1960 or before 1978, you can use the Zola City Planning website. It's called Zola, and it's New York City Zola. If you look up NYC Zola, you can find the year of building built for most structures in New York City. You can also use a lead check kit to determine if there is lead in the paint, and that will help you to kind of tailor your risk, and again, to use the EPA's safe work practices guides to prevent lead poisoning, as well as any other issues that you may encounter when you're doing work, because every home is different and homes have many hazards. Not to be scary, but the other issue are non-pet animals, and by that I mean pests. If you discover a major pest infestation when you go in, please call 311. We do have people who can assist with a lot of those issues, especially a rat infestation. Rat infestations are very difficult to deal with and can be very problematic, so it's good to get a little guidance on that. Sorry I didn't have that slide, but I will again send those links. So when you're going into the home, back to mold and just your routine damage, it's good to assess the situation. We recommend checking the home's exterior and behind or under siding for damage and for wetness. Siding may have to be removed prior to rebuilding to allow prior to finishing the home to allow for thorough drying. It may be trapping water behind the wall. You also want to inspect the interior for what is damaged, what is still wet. Are there areas with a stronger odor? Are there places with discoloration, such as patches of gray, green, or brown? And that would be probably mold, but it could be dirt, so you need to investigate that. It's also good to know, what are the walls made of? Are they made of brick or concrete or plaster? Are those still structurally sound? If they are, you may just need to clean those with something like a brush or a sturdy sponge. Those can be cleaned and let dry. However, sheetrock, which is probably more common, is often covered with paint, but it's often underneath the paint, it's covered with paper and glue. Above the gypsum, which is inside, or whatever the mineral material is, and mold is very happy to live on glue and paper, as well as paint. Also investigate hidden areas such as attics, crawl spaces, closets, behind wall boards, baseboards, paneling, and insulation. Water may have been trapped behind in those spaces or behind those panels, and you may have mold growth there. If you are applying for disaster assistance or filing an insurance company or claim, take photos of all damage before cleaning up and keep receipts of all your repair work, as well as contacting your insurance provider or FEMA before you do any of the work to find out what the requirements are. Angela's going to be talking a lot more about that, so I'll let that go to her, but those are important to know. It's good to know what you should do before you do it, so you don't do the wrong thing and have to pay more money. Once you've assessed the situation, it's good to think about safety first. Open the windows and doors to ventilate areas as much as possible. Get a good airflow. I realize that in some spaces this is a pipe dream. People don't have very much ventilation because they barely have things outside. They may have another building very close, but as much as you can get ventilation, that's great. Strong cleaning products, dust, and mold can irritate the eyes, nose, and throat, as well as the lungs, and you want to try to reduce that. Keep children and pets out of the area. If your home has extensive damage, consider hiring a professional to repair the home. And by extensive damage, I mean things like if there's a problem with the foundation, You need someone to do that who can really do a good job. It's also for things like structural damage to brick or concrete or to plaster walls are much more complicated to fix than cutting out sheetrock. So know what you can do and know what you probably shouldn't do. And if you don't feel comfortable, it's good to have someone who does know what they're doing. This may seem obvious, but it happens all the time. Do not run any electrical equipment or appliances near standing water on wet materials. It's a good way to get an electric shock or be electrocuted, which is also a very bad way to end the day. And clean your hands often with soap and water, especially before eating and drinking. Some of the materials, maybe you can wash off your hands, such as mold. You may not be breathing in and having any health effects, but again, if you eat it, you might feel sick. Another point that sometimes is another good safe work practice is to clean or mist dry moldy surfaces with a dilute detergent solution before cutting into, say, sheetrock or other building materials. So you spray it with a dilute detergent solution, so water with a little bit of detergent. The reason for the detergent instead of just water is that spraying water on dry mold can cause the mold spores to bounce off the surface. They're slightly hydrophobic or oily, and so they will bounce off and then they're in your airways. And the detergent keeps the dust down and it makes it just less dusty in the room, and it makes it easier to cut into the materials that you need to work on. It's another thing that's great to have for people are HEPA vacuum shrouded tools, and that's high efficiency particulate air, or a HEPA vacuum, and that again reduces the dust kick-up from a regular vacuum, which may cause dust to get into the air and then you're breathing it in. So once you've kind of assessed everything, you have some of your safety measures in place, remove and clean damaged materials. So as soon as possible, when you go into a space, it's good to remove anything that's wet or moldy. Some things may now be fairly dry, but they may not be depending on the situation. Try to dry out affected areas as much and as soon as possible. It's good to open a window or use a fan, but even better if you have a dehumidifier, that will be very helpful. In places where it's still wet, dehumidifiers can help pull water out of the air. In normal situations, we recommend the comfort level for people for relative humidity, which is the amount of water, basically amount of water in the air, is 30 to 60%. Below 30, you will get things like static shock. You touch the light fixture and you get sparks, or you'll have headaches, dry eyes, sore throat from the dryness. And above 60, you just have a heightened chance of mold growth. So 30 to 60 is the magic zone, but in a situation like this, I would recommend running your dehumidifier as low as it'll go to really pull the water out of the space. So once you've removed some of those things, then you get to the next stage where you're removing and discarding porous building materials that got wet. In general, things like ceiling tiles, wall paneling, drywall, sheetrock, if they got wet, they can rarely be salvaged. If you do have sheetrock that needs to be removed, cut in with something like a box cutter. Don't use an axe, but carefully cut in, just in case there are wires or pipes or anything behind it. Cut above 6 inches, about at least 6 inches above the level, the highest level that the water went. And then, as well as cutting out and removing that board from the wall, that panel, also remove any wet or visibly damaged or soiled insulation. You're going to have to replace that as well. And try to remove that about the same level as you do with the sheetrock. unless it's dirty or wet above that level. Discard or thoroughly clean and dry water damaged items such as rugs, clothing, anything like that with detergent and water. You can wash those usually as you normally would. If they need to be dry cleaned, you could do that as well. There may be things, since it has been some time since Ida, that may not be salvageable, such as paper, such as books. Those are very difficult to clean. But there are some resources on CDC's website about salvaging very important items like family photos or books or things like that from the Smithsonian. And I'd be happy to send you that link as well. For non-porous materials such as metal, glass, or hard plastic that may have some mold on them, the mold is probably growing either on paint or on dust or something that's on top of those materials. Clean those with a liquid dish detergent. Electronics generally cannot be cleaned. You may have to contact the manufacturer to see if those are salvageable. Wood, furniture, concrete, and other semi-porous or porous materials can be cleaned if they were undamaged and structurally sound. Again, use either a cleaner that's for those items, such as wood cleaner. Sometimes there's special furniture cleaner, which is a special type of detergent, or just liquid dish detergent work well for that. And then just make sure they get really dry. So, once the damaged sheetrock and insulation have been removed, try to leave the walls open until they dry out to prevent sealing and moisture. Don't replace anything until everything is completely clean and dry. If you trap water if you trap water behind the wall, put new sheetrock right away, it's a recipe for disaster. You're going to get mold growth again, because the water is still there. If available, it's great to use or to borrow or buy a moisture meter to test materials for dryness. A lot of times things seem dry to the touch, but they are actually still wet. The moisture meters are available in hardware stores. They're also available online. They range widely in price, but they measure the percentage of water in a material. So whether that's wood, concrete, exterior wood, interior, and they should give you a scale for what's an acceptable level of water so you know whether it's really truly dry or whether it just feels dry on the surface. Those are not necessary, but they are a good investment if you're going to be doing this type of work. When you are done, when you leave, missed a step, put any discarded materials in sealed plastic bags, and you can throw those away with regular trash. If it is mold, it is not hazardous waste. Those can just be thrown away with the regular trash. Once you leave, when you leave, you've cut out the sheetrock, replaced it, whatever, and the mold is gone, it's cleaned up, the soggy materials are removed. All areas should be left dry and free of visible mold, dust, and debris. If you do have remaining damp areas, bubbling or peeling paint, mold growth, or musty odors, those indicate a more persistent problem that requires investigation. So, I missed out on a slide previously. Just a second, let's see if I can, here. I'm so sorry, my slides are a mess. Cleaning products. What kind of cleaning products are you using? We do not necessarily say you have to use cleaning product A, cleaning product B, but please read and follow label directions for all cleaning products. I cannot emphasize that enough. They wrote the labels for a reason, and follow them. Do not mix cleaning products, especially bleach and ammonia. Like I mentioned before, you do not want to have a trip to the emergency room during your day, and that can lead to explosions. It's also very hazardous to breathe in. So make sure you know what you're going to use and you can use it as safely as possible. We recommend, and I'm going to go through what we recommend as well as what CDC and many other health agencies in various parts of the world recommend, is cleaning with detergent and water for mold. Use virtually any kind of detergent. Liquid detergent works just fine, such as that you would use for your dishes. Clean items with the detergent, then rinse with clean water, then let it dry. If you need a disinfectant, such as if you had sewage, or if you simply want to disinfect, then use diluted bleach. Don't use straight bleach, use diluted household bleach. So that's 1 cup of household bleach added to 2 gallons of water. However, if you are going to use a disinfectant cleaner, such as some of the shower cleaners are often a detergent mixed with a disinfectant, or Shockwave is another product that I've heard mentioned. Do not use bleach. You don't use, that's 1 cleaning product. Just clean with that product and then you rinse and then you let it dry. The reason for our recommendations, which are detergent and water or soap, is that detergent removes mold, oils, and soil. It actually has, detergent molecules have a oily end and a aqueous end. So they form little bubbles around the dirt or the oils or the mold. And when you put the water in, it just removes those from the surface. Just like you've seen on some dish detergent ads. It removes those out, those particles are gone. Disinfectants just kill things that are on the surface. They can kill it quickly, and there are many different types of disinfectant, from white vinegar to bleach to quaternary ammoniums, which is what's in Shockwave. However, they just kill what's on the surface. So you need the detergent to remove the mold. Molds that are dead or dried can still be allergenic, and they can still cause health problems. So you want to remove the mold. Another factor is that the reason for the washing, rinsing, then disinfecting is the disinfectants work best on clean surfaces. Every disinfectant has a contact time, and that's the time it needs to be on the surface working in order to kill what's ever on there. You also want to make sure you rinse that off afterwards, because you don't want disinfectant to get, especially if it's on like a food surface, you don't want to be eating disinfectant. So these are our recommendations. Like I said, the most important thing is that you're just reading and following the label directions, that you're not mixing chemicals. But detergent, water, and a disinfectant are readily available and cheap and effective. So I zipped ahead, sorry. So if you are working with, or you live in a building where there's 10 or more square feet of mold, and the building has 10 or more apartments, under New York state law, landlords must use a New York State Department of Labor licensed mold assessor and remediator. There's more information on this program if you Google New York State Department of Labor mold program. It will give all the rules that need to be followed, and this is in both New York City and New York State law. And if you have any questions, please ask. In the future, please call 311 for questions about mold and health effects. And I think I had my name on the slides that I intended to use today. I am very sorry. I had my email address, but I will make sure that Hannah gets that out. And thank you very much. And I'm sorry for thank you for your patience too on my technical problems. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maureen. All right, so let me get my screen share going. Okay. That here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Maureen. I think I know a few folks who are on this call. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angela Calabro. I've been in New York City disaster recovery since Sandy. Most recently until July, we closed up our Rockaway office, having completed about 500 homes in Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island. And so it's possible that we've crossed paths before. But in my new role with SBP, I am empowered to and charged with kind of sharing all of the information and experience that I learned in New York, and also get to collaborate with my greater SBP team from 16 years of disaster recovery since our New Orleans operation opened after Hurricane Katrina 16 years ago. So since then, a little bit of just brief background of SBP. Like I said, we got started after Katrina 16 years ago and realized the model and the process that we were using, which lends volunteer labor and AmeriCorps members, which if you're not familiar with is basically a domestic Peace Corps program. So we use AmeriCorps members, volunteers, and of course contractors to manage clients and any kind of like case management, all done in-house. And so by keeping it all in-house, we're able to kind of monitor the process and be just one point of contact for the client rather than have them deal with multiple points of contact. And that system really worked well in New Orleans. So after there was an EF5 tornado in Joplin, Missouri in 2011, I believe, we went out there, lent our model, and it worked. It was able to help the Joplin community recover faster than they would have than they were projected to complete. And then again, after New York and New Jersey were hit by Hurricane Sandy, SBP came up and lent the model, and we had now just been doing it kind of in communities ever since. So we have an operating site in Houston after Harvey, Puerto Rico after Irma and Maria, Florida after Michael, South Carolina, Bahamas even, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others, but basically what I'm trying to say here is that what knowledge we've learned in New Orleans has been really transferable to lots of communities. And now with Hurricane Ida in the Gulf region, and especially in New York and New Jersey, and being from here, I'm just really excited to be able to share all of this knowledge. And it's a lot of content, but the slides will come out after. We can send, this will be recorded, but we can also send a follow-up with this. And I'll highlight a few tips throughout that I think are just like really relevant and hopefully good takeaways for you to make your recovery a little bit shorter than maybe it would have been otherwise. So with that, I'll get started. So again, our mission is to shrink the time between disaster recovery. We do that in a bunch of different ways. Of course, rebuilding, sharing, which is what I'm doing. We talk extensively about preparedness. Of course, we believe there's more than just having a go bag ready for if and when the next disaster happens. We also work with elected officials and advocate on the federal level for broader change. We realize that we can only do so much going into all of the different communities that are affected, but really where it needs to be changed is at the federal level. So we also work in that venue. But if you're I'm not gonna go into this too much. If you're interested in learning more, there's on the bottom of each slide, I have sbpprotects.org. That's really gonna show you where all the resources are that I mentioned, but more specifically, sbpusa.org will like provide you all of the content and context about SBP. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go through a lot today. I organized it here into like the biggest, I think, and most important categories. First and foremost is you are your best advocate. Nobody is going to advocate for you the way that you are. We understand that a lot of the different agencies you're going to be working with or talking to may make you feel less empowered than you should, or maybe confuse you with some of the terminology that they use. And although I'm going to go through a lot of the terminology, this is your recovery. It's your home and it's your process to walk through. And so we want to remind you that these agencies and partners are here to work with you, like in partnership with you. And if you need time or like to ask follow-up questions, feel confident that you can do that. You don't have to feel rushed. You can take the time that you need to like deeply internally understand what's going on. Is also appealing decisions is really important. Just because somebody tells you no the first time, really any agency, even with SBP, there's an appeal process that clients can take. It's really important that you understand no might not mean no, a final no, and you can at minimum go back and ask why. Documentation is obviously key. I'll talk extensively about receipts. Maureen touched on it a little bit, but like there's no way around it. Receipts, like everything has to be documented, and then keep at it. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Unfortunately, it's going to take maybe weeks and months to really fully get back to where you were. And so we just want to remind people that take the time you need. Self-care is really important. If you have a moment to spend with your family rather than, you know, make it another run to Lowe's for something, take a minute to like be with your family and rejuvenate a little bit. And for any of you or your friends or family that are really struggling, I put the disaster distress helpline here. That's monitored and run by SAMHSA. So they're professional social workers, and they do this all the time. And so they're here for you. And if you or a loved one, like I mentioned, really is having a hard time, I like highly recommend reaching out to them. These folks are really, really great. Okay, so just briefly here, I've broken it down into modules. I normally would pause, but I'm not going to pause in between. I'm just going to go through, and then at the end, the panel of us will just take questions. So the first module is really just going to be about what to expect. Okay, so some financial resources that are generally available after a disaster. So I've kind of listed them out into two categories here. First and foremost is going to be any sort of insurance you have. If you're a renter, renter's insurance, homeowner insurance, flood insurance, those are really going to be the groups that can get you back to where you were before. Big difference between them and FEMA is insurance might be able to get you back to where you were before, whereas FEMA is really just meant to make the home safe, secure, and sanitary for you. So if you had a granite countertop and you're not able to get that reimbursed by your insurance, and you're able to get it by FEMA, you're most likely not going to get that granite countertop. But the laminate countertop you have, surprise, will function as a countertop. And so you can still use that and be able to use your kitchen. So just important there that there's a difference, but your insurance agencies are really going to be the first like line of defense for your funding recovery to come back to you. And then there's SBA, which I think can be a little confusing for people since it's the Small Business Administration, and it's why is Small Business Administration helping out after disaster? But they pivot after a disaster is federally declared, which it has been, and they open up to homeowners and small businesses alike. And I'll talk more about that in additional slides. And also, of course, charitable aid nonprofits like SBP. There's lots of other nonprofits that are available and help with this sort of rebuild. Other sources of assistance, there's this is a really big one, I think. Mortgage forbearance and deferment programs, and really any lender or loan program that you're in. It's so important to go back and ask them if they have any deferment or forbearance. I'll talk about it more, but you want to ask for deferment first and then forbearance. And the reason being is that a deferment program is going to stop you from accruing interest. And you know, with any negotiating, you go in and you ask for the lowest thing. The people, they're not going to tell you, oh, there's also a deferment program. So we want to recommend you say, hey, do you have a deferment program? No. Okay. Is there a forbearance program? The forbearance program will have you continue to accrue interest. And so of course you prefer the deferment. You tell them, I was affected by Tropical Storm Ida. What programs do you have for me? For any lender. And then there's disaster unemployment and some other loan hardship programs. Okay, so again, like I mentioned here, you want to really get in touch with all of those agencies and different lenders as soon as possible. There's a website that is going to be on several slides, but it's disasterassistance.gov. Again, disasterassistance.gov. That's really going to have a list of the different programs within each of these sort of bigger lending companies. So you can check out that website and they should have more information on specific programs for the specific companies. And again, it's credit cards, utilities, student loans, even auto loans, phone, cable, anything that you might be paying monthly. You want to call them and say, hey, there's been a disturbance and is there any programs available for me? Okay, so this is something we saw, I mean, we at SBP require these documents, but really any sort of case management agency or FEMA or your insurance is going to require these. And so I put together this list. It's not like all inclusive. There's, I'm sure, more information that could be here, but basically what you're going to be asked for, and if you haven't collected this already, you can still collect it now. Of course, if you have one of those amazing fireproof, waterproof boxes with everything, amazing. If you don't, you can still go take a minute and try to get copies of stuff. But what we're trying to prove here is that you are who you say you are, you have the income that you say you have, that your house is yours, that you can prove residence or ownership, or if you're a renter, that you have a lease prior to the date of Tropical Storm Ida, and that you can show pre and post storm damage and value of your home. So again, like Social Security, that's going to show you who you are. Financial information, it's going to prove that your income is what you say it is. Proof of residence is really important. And then I'm going to talk extensively about it, but a really itemized, very specific list of the items in your home. It's crazy, I think, to go walk around your home and try to list on a spreadsheet every item that's in it. I think I read that there's like 3 million items in the average American home, which is a lot. But you can also take pictures. You can take pictures, and then every April, pre-storm season, that's why we pick April, every April you go in, you take pictures of your house, room by room, closet by closet, and then you upload that to somewhere like the cloud, G Suite, Google, Dropbox is really good, and I think they have a free service too. So you want every year to be taking that inventory so that if and when something happens, you have the list and you can easily show and reference, this is what everything looked like before, and this is now what it looks like after. And so you're going to do that exact same walkthrough after Ida if you haven't already. It's just going to be a really like good metrics for you to measure everything by. And while you're in this like really stressful, horrible moment trying to recover now from Tropical Storm Ida, you at least have the knowledge that you have all these photos, before and after photos. And so I think that will be really like grounding for people. Okay, so now we'll get into everyone's favorite topic, insurance. I know it's mine. No, it's not. Actually, I like the contractor fraud module personally. But insurance, so what it covers here. So of course, different policies are going to cover different things, and your coverages.
There, few in number, but there he became a great.
Oh, hello. Can I just ask if everyone can be muted? Sorry, I thought I had a question there. Thank you. Okay, so for our renters insurance and homeowners insurance, again, it's going to cover different things depending on your coverages. A really good place to find what your coverages are in kind of simple language is going to be the declaration page of your policies. The policies are really difficult to read through. I mean, I know for even my car insurance, it's a lot to read through. You want to be looking at that declaration page as soon as possible to see what your coverages are, when your deadlines are, and so you don't feel rushed and you feel really prepared. Homeowners and renters insurance are going to generally cover replacement and repairs to home and property, and additional living expenses that might have been incurred from being displaced. And then of course, flood insurance is going to be a little bit different in that it will be able to cover preventative expenses. So like if you needed a storage unit because your you have a ground level apartment, or you have a ground level floor where you have a lot of your stuff, you put it into storage, or you use sandbags to try to prevent the water from coming in. Those expenses can sometimes be covered by your flood insurance. And so that's like a big difference that I think is important, really important to note here. If you're a renter without insurance, you actually may be able to apply for FEMA, and you can also apply for SBA. So we'll get to that in a minute, but just wanted to mention that if you do have those insurance coverages, you can reach out to FEMA and SBA. Okay. Let's see, one more thing I wanted to mention too. So if you have homeowners insurance or flood insurance, when you are cleaning or removing debris from your home, it's really important that you keep a lot of that stuff just on the property. If possible, if it's possible to keep it on the property, you want to try to keep it there so that when you do have an adjuster come out and take a look at it, they can see the full impact. And the idea here is to really show them what level of damage that you have. If you had a water line or a watermark in your ground level story, you want to be able to show them that. I mean, even if you just keep like 1 square foot of it, obviously you want to remove that and clean it properly the way that Maureen had mentioned. But if you can keep some sort of physical marker so that they can come in and see, okay, yep, this is exactly how much water they had. We'll get into FEMA a little bit more, but they won't be able to come into the home physically. And so if you have it on the exterior too, that's going to be really helpful. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we'll talk a bit about our federal assistance. So that's going to be FEMA and SBA. Okay, so I have a bit to cover here. So at its core, I think FEMA can be like very confusing for people, but at its core, it's truly meant to be supportive and a supplement for families who aren't able to get recovery resources elsewhere. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. It's here to support homeowners that aren't able to get support elsewhere. There's lots of different programs. I've listed kind of a few of the main ones, but they're meant to work in partnership with you. If you have a question, call your FEMA representative. If they call you, you also need to be answering and calling them back in a timely manner. Again, it's a partnership. Everyone wants to work together to the same solution, but that means that on both ends, there needs to be a willing partnership there. So just want to remind folks that they have the same interests as you, and it's just important that you're working with them and not feeling confused or rushed, like take your time, do what you need, but they also need to hear from you in a timely manner. So a few programs here. So we have the Temporary Housing Assistance Program, which is available to New York City homeowners. There's the Clean and Sanitize Assistance Program. And so that actually, I think that's a pretty cool program I recently learned about. It's a $300 one-time payment or voucher for people to clean out their homes and do some mold remediation. So I'll say that again. It is a one-time household payment of $300 to help people clean out their homes and do mold remediation. Again, we'll have the panel at the end with any Q&As that come up, but just wanted to remind people of that. And there's also rental assistance for our renters out there, that if they need any help relocating or figuring out where they go next, the rental assistance program is available for them. And so then there's also the ONA, the Other Needs Assistance Program, is literally what the title says. It's for other needs. So it's going to be medical, funeral, childcare, transportation, cleanup items, really like anything that doesn't really fit into any of these other categories. I also wanted to note on the bottom here, I have the disasterassistance.gov site again. And I put it on a few of the slides actually, because it's also where you're going to be able to track your FEMA application. So once you submit an application, if you want to track it, again, I would recommend you talk to your FEMA representative and say, okay, what's the next step here? When can I expect to hear from someone? How will I expect to hear from somebody? Is it going to be an email, a letter, a call? Just so you know, and so that you're aware. But independently, you can be going on disasterassistance.gov and making sure that you're kind of doing your due diligence to know what's coming next. Go to the next slide here. Okay, so what is SBA and why would you apply for it? Why is it involved in FEMA? So SBA, like I said, it's the Small Business Administration. They do support small businesses, but in times of disaster, they provide loans to homeowners and renters. Big difference here is that it's a loan and not a grant. Your FEMA and your insurance is going to be a grant, where this is a loan. It's a low interest loan, so it's between 1.5% to 3.5% generally. And it's offered for up to a 30-year term, but again, it's a loan, so you will have to pay it back. How it fits into all of this, I guess like confusion you could say, is in order sometimes to apply for FEMA, they may recommend that you apply to SBA to see what you're eligible for, what loan aid you're eligible for. That does not mean that you have to accept the loan. You do not have to accept the loan, but they might want to see how much you would be eligible for through SBA to determine then what you're eligible for through FEMA. So I think that's important. It is a loan, it's a low interest loan. You may just be asked to apply just so that they can learn more about what you're eligible for, and then that's what they'll use to make a determination of your FEMA aid. And pretty much anyone can apply. I definitely recommend SBA. It's not to be used for secondary homes. So if you have multiple properties, you can apply, but you might not get approved. But rental units can qualify. So if you're a renter, you should apply. But also small businesses, private nonprofits, houses of worship may also apply. So it's a good resource for a lot of different groups of people that might not fit neatly into another box. So for that reason, and the interest rate, I think it's sometimes can be a really good solution for folks just needing extra financial support here. Okay, so FEMA damage assessments. So this, I do this presentation also for some of our Louisiana families, and it seems like across the board, this is what I've learned about FEMA's reaction to COVID in 2021. It's ever evolving. We all have had to change with COVID every few months and every year. The criteria for face coverings or social distancing feels like it's a kind of an ebb and flow thing, but FEMA is in a similar situation. And so with Tropical Storm Ida, the inspections are being done, if needed, only to the exterior of the property. And so what I mean there is if you submit your application to FEMA, they determine that you need an inspection. It will only be an exterior walkthrough. So just the outside of your home will be seen with and by the FEMA inspector. They will not come inside. So if you have photos of the inside, which we recommend that you do, have lots of photos of the inside, like I mentioned earlier, you can show that to the inspector when they're there, but they can not physically take that. So they can't like take a picture of a photo that you printed out and showed them. They can't, you can't like, have them take a copy of it, none of that. They can recommend, and we also recommend, that you upload those photos to your online case file. So again, highly recommend that you're taking lots of pictures, like Maureen mentioned. You want to be looking in every part of your house, the closets, the crawl space, the attic, behind, if you can peel up, if you have wood paneling and you can look under there and see what's going on. If it had been, it had water on it, check all of those areas, take pictures as much as you can. Videos are great too, and upload that all to your online case file. Probably one of the most important things in this whole presentation is the tip that I have here at the bottom, which, I mean, maybe I need to highlight it even more, bold it and make it yellow or something. But when you're on the phone with your FEMA inspector or agent and they ask you, do you have immediate needs? The answer to that question needs to be yes. And the question of, has your home been damaged? The answer needs to be yes, or unknown if you're like not able to go into the crawl space physically to determine that. But literally answering no to those questions could disqualify you for assistance, or could move you from a moderate to severe damage pathway, which you may rightfully need, into a minor pathway because of how you answered that question. So again, I know it's kind of trivial because it's a 5-word question, but really, really important that you're answering yes to those questions of, do you have immediate needs, and has your home been damaged? Yes. This way, if you start out with moderate to severe needs, the inspector comes out, maybe really rightfully determine that you only need minor repairs, then okay, you can move into the minor repairs pathway. But you want to start with saying, yes, I have needs, like my ground level is unlivable, and make sure that you're representing that appropriately and using as much detail as possible. So if you had 18 inches of water on your ground level floor and it's slab on grade foundation, and you have that knowledge, you want to say that. Like, you want to say, I had 18 inches of water, it covered up my outlets, it's on my ground level floor, I have slab on grade foundation, and now I think mold is starting to grow. And being that level of detailed is going to help FEMA make a proper and appropriate determination for you. I also put FEMA.gov's website on here. It's obviously very easy to remember, but I think important that it's on here so that you're able to access it for any other questions that you have too. Another important note here on FEMA, and somebody told this to me a few weeks ago, and I just thought, wow, that's so relevant. I think we live in a time where people don't answer spam phone numbers, or just phone numbers that are basically out of their zip code. I know I have my New York zip code, and I call people in Louisiana all the time and nobody ever answers. So it's really lovely. But when you are working with FEMA, especially, and your insurance companies, they may call you, especially if you already have a walkthrough or a visit scheduled. The inspector is going to call you or text you or something from an unknown number, and it's so important that you answer that. If you don't answer that after 3 times, you could be at risk for being removed from the program, because they're trying to reach you, they're trying to come to the house and make contact and see the home, and if you're not answering that, again, that shows that they're not able to work with you. So just really important that you on the lookout for calls from random numbers. Even if you just do this for a few weeks, answer all the numbers that call you. I know it's a painful experience to answer those phone calls, but it may really help you in the long run. And also, while they're there, again, you want to have like prepared beforehand before they get there, so that you're not even more stressed or overwhelmed by the questions they're asking. We recommend, like, again, doing the walkthrough, having the pictures, but knowing kind of what your goal is. Like, what are you trying to get to? Are you trying to get your whole first floor gutted? Are you trying to just have funding for replacement of, say it was on non-livable basement, you just want to get the ceiling cleaned up and new drywall put up there? What are you aiming for here? And so then when you're going into all of these conversations, tether yourself to that so that you're not overwhelmed and getting pulled in a bunch of directions. Just stay really clear on what your goal is, and make sure that everything that you do kind of works towards that direction. Okay, so I'll go on to the next slide here. Okay, so reporting damage, like I mentioned, details matter. Every detail that you give them is only going to be able to help them understand your situation even more. Again, being your own best advocate, be really confident in what you're asking for, tether yourself to your end goal, and go as slowly as you need. I'm all Italian, and my parents are both from East New York, and my mother is an aggressive person. And no matter who she's talking to on a customer service line, if she doesn't like what she's hearing, she'll immediately ask for their supervisor. And I don't know that I'm like that, and I don't know that I'm encouraging people to be that aggressive. I'm definitely not, but like, that's the level of advocating for yourself here that I'm asking for. It's so important that you understand what you need and what your needs are, and you're representing that appropriately and at your own pace to all of the different agencies that you're going to be working with. And there's a damage assessment guide at sbpprotects.org that talks about this even more. But again, I just can't stress it enough. You're your best advocate, and work in partnership with these other agencies. And remember that they're here to support you and your recovery. And then of course, photos and videos are going to help a lot. Receipts are key. I have a homeowner I worked with in New York City. She was one of the last people that we worked with. She gave over 100 original receipts to an agency, and the agency then lost all of the original receipts. And I don't understand why she gave them all of the originals, and it's of course inappropriate that they lost all of them. But now she's trying to go back through her debit card and her checking account and savings account to see if she has record of a lot of these things. And I mean, she's not going to find all of that. A lot of it she paid for in cash, and so it's just not going to be reimbursed. But don't give your originals of anything. Please make copies of everything and keep the originals, and even make an extra copy. So just in case you have an extra copy. If you're needing to buy gas, or you had a generator going, and so you bought gas for it and you forgot to get a receipt at the station, take a picture of the pump on your phone that shows the amount that you spent. That's going to be time-stamped. It's going to show the location if it's on a smartphone, and it's going to show the amount that you paid. So it's not the best, but it's something. And that's the level of receipts and documentation that we're encouraging for folks. Okay, so appeals here. So I didn't have much experience with appeals up until a few weeks ago, but basically what I've learned is I've just put it all here to share it with you folks. So when you're applying for FEMA, there's a chance that you're going to be denied, like any agency. So if you get denied, they highly recommend, and we recommend, that you appeal that decision. It is generally just part of the process. It's part of the application process or relationship that you're going to have with FEMA to appeal. And so there's nothing wrong with appealing. You getting money from FEMA does not mean that your neighbor is going to get any less money, or if they have what you determine to be a greater need than you. No, you appeal a decision if you have a need that is not going to be met by anybody else. You have 60 days generally from the decision date to file your written appeal. And for extra clarification, you can talk to disaster recovery centers, the disaster legal aid offices, or on the next slide, I have the New York Legal Assistance Group that is also available to help answer questions about your FEMA appeal. But again, just because you've been denied does not mean that you are out of the process. I understand, I would be, I think, intimidated if a federal agency told me I was denied. I would understandably probably not think my next course of action is to appeal it, but it's really important that we spread the word that you can appeal and you should appeal the decision. And even if you get what you feel is an inappropriate amount of funding, if you believe you have $10,000 worth of repair needs and you get $2,000, if you have a contractor come out who's licensed and insured and can give you an estimate or a bid that shows this is the breakdown of the work that's needed, here's the $10,000 total, get at least two of those, again, at least two of those, and you can submit that to FEMA for your appeal to show, hey, you gave me $2,000, I have all these contractors saying that it's going to be $10,000, how can we work together to find a solution here? So there are ways that you can still work with FEMA after you're denied. Okay, so these are some of the resources I mentioned. I'll leave it here just for a second in case anybody wants to write it down. I also have on here the tech support number for FEMA. So they are not going to be able to help you with your application. They are literally just going to be able to help you with the online portion of that if you have questions about it. Okay. Okay, so then we go into just a summary recap here of what I mentioned earlier. So we're going to keep records of all your communication. So what I want to mention here is that, again, you're answering the phone when the inspectors and agents call you or text you, but for all other forms of communication with your insurance or FEMA, it's really recommended that you do this all via writing. So like emails, text messages, certified mail, like you want to have copies of all communication, because if someone tells you something and then you talk to somebody else and it's a totally different story, it's just a he said, she said. So get everything in writing, try to only communicate with insurance companies and FEMA in written form, and keeping copies of all the documents that you receive from them. You're also going to write your name and registration number on everything that you submit for your appeal and for your application. Once you have an assigned number, you want to put your name and registration number on all of those documents so that nothing can get lost or end up not getting tagged to you. You can also request your file from FEMA to find out what information they used to make their decision. Again, it's just advocating for yourself, asking why was I not approved, or why was I approved at that level? Can you explain to me why? And they'll be able to support you with that. Again, I have the New York Legal Assistance Group, and your FEMA ID number is going to be really important that you keep that. SBP and other agencies included will want to know how much you received from FEMA and your insurance. If you misuse or misappropriate money from FEMA or your insurance company, basically there's two different options that could happen. Short term, you may be discovered that you inappropriately used that funding. If you had one oven and now you want 2 ovens, you can't use that money for the 2 ovens. You have to use the money for what it's earmarked for. So in the short term, you could have to pay it back, which is not great. Nobody wants to have to do that. But long term, if and when you go and apply for additional funding from, say, nonprofits or other agencies, they're going to ask you for receipts. They're going to ask you what you received from FEMA and insurance. And if they find out that this is what happened here, that it was misused, then you'll probably be ineligible to receive additional funding in the future. So again, short term, you have to pay back. Long term, you're not eligible to receive any other funding because you misused the money that was given to you. So very important note there. And then the FEMA hotline I have listed here also. I'll just leave this up for just a second in case people have questions. No, I mean, not questions, but want to take that number down. Okay. So Maureen did an amazing job of mold. I don't know even a quarter of the information on mold that Maureen does, so I'm not going to touch that. If you guys have questions on it, please ask us at the end. But there's some basic things that I can share with you too. So of course, before you start spending money, COVID, I think, has kept everybody inside and hasn't allowed us to maybe interact with our neighbors and friends like we used to. But your neighbors and friends may have gone through this too, and you might be able to kind of share the load of cleaning out the debris from both of your homes. There's also voluntary organizations and church groups that tend to be available after disaster, and so those groups might be in the area and might be able to help you also. If you need help removing debris, you can generally call 311. They might be able to put you in touch with the right resources, but we can talk about that more towards the end of the webinar here. And know what can be DIY. So like Maureen said, a lot of it can be done on your own and really affordably done on your own. Just make sure that you're doing it using the advice and guidance that she recommended. Okay, so again, when you're doing this, you want to remove the damaged materials from your home, place them on the curb for pickup, saving samples of any high-grade materials, because again, your insurance company may be able to get you back to what you had. Frequently though, insurance policies will cover actual costs, not real costs. And so what that means is when you bought that sofa 20 years ago for $5,000, it's now worth $500. You're going to get reimbursed for $500. So just again, be really careful and read through those declaration pages on your insurance policies so you know what you're going to be reimbursed for. And they won't reimburse you until after you've purchased the item. So don't expect to get any sort of reimbursement up front. Once you purchase the item, you save your receipts, you show your insurance company, and then generally you could get reimbursed depending on your policy. But again, it's all really policy dependent. So you're leaving the watermark, like I mentioned, and cleaning and disinfecting items that are salvageable. like Maureen mentioned extensively, and then keeping the items in the property so that adjusters and inspectors can see them. Again, so we're going to dry everything out really thoroughly. Flood insurance policyholders are responsible for taking reasonable steps to prevent or limit mold growth. With Sandy, I know like when people had tree limbs fall on their roof, if it was like reasonable for them to remove the tree limb, they were responsible for removing the tree limb and then maybe just putting a tarp, a blue tarp on the roof to prevent additional water from coming in. Or if the pipes broke, if the pipes have broken, you want to shut off the main, obviously, to make sure that no water is additionally coming in. Okay. So this is actually the module that I feel most strongly about, the contractor module here. I'll tell you why, because we rebuilt homes for about 500 people in the boroughs after Sandy, but probably had met about 500 more than that even, that we ended up referring out to other agencies. And I would say, and unfortunately, lots of people on this call probably have the same experience and feelings that I do, but 80% of the families that I ever spoke with in my 9 years with SBP's Sandy recovery was a result of contractor fraud. And it's so prevalent. I worked in our Houston operation and our New Orleans operation, and it was just as prevalent there. So it's not at all specific to New York City. But some big red flags that I noticed: people knocking door to door, not providing estimates in writing. A text message means nothing. It's garbage. If they text you, this is the price, don't use that. That means nothing. So you want everything to be in writing. Anybody who's requesting a payment in cash or asking you to sign over any sort of claim or settlement check to them, you wouldn't tell us, generally a stranger on the street, what your salary is. And so do not tell these contractors what your settlement amount is. They don't need to know that. That's like very personal information. So there's no deposit, there's no giving cash up front to them. If you have $5,000 worth of like repairs that are needed and your contractor says, oh, well, I need you to give me $1,500 up front so I can get started. That says a lot about their business model. And if their business model is such that they can't afford to put $1,500 out so that they can get started on your project and wait for payment, that's probably not somebody you want to work with. At SBP, our policy is a 50-50 policy. And I would say if your scope is, over like $5,000, even do it in thirds. But basically what we recommend is after 50% of the work gets done, you yourself physically go to the house, see the work, make sure with your own eyes that you're good with it, and then you can release 50% of payment. And then again, let them do the next 50%, make sure that it's done, you're comfortable with it, and then you go and release the next 50% of payment. Do not pay people up front, especially do not give them the full payment up front. Get at least 2, 3 is better estimates in writing from contractors that are licensed and insured. I can't stress that enough. If they're not willing to show you their licensing and insurance, they're definitely not someone you want to work with. Even family and friend recommendations. I've heard lots of stories about people who don't speak to their sister-in-law or brother-in-law anymore because their significant other did a really poor job of construction after Sandy, and it destroyed the family. So just keep everything very professional. If you can go to Better Business Bureau or Chambers of Commerce, they'll have a good list of reputable contractors, and they do exist. There are lots of contractors that are really great, reputable people that really just are trying to do repairs properly. But I think disasters, especially after Sandy, can bring out the best of people, helping neighbors, and totally brings out the worst too. So just be very, very careful with the contractors that you choose to work with and speak with. Another slide here, because I feel that strongly about contractor fraud. So not, of course, they can take your money and disappear with it. They can also do a really low quality job. And so I'm not advocating for you to stand over them at all and babysit them while they're doing construction, because I will tell you from experience that will have the exact opposite effect of what you're looking for.
You want to give them some space, but be checking on your home and the progress every so often so you know what's getting done and when. And they should be working with proper permits and licenses where applicable. So again, looking for poor quality. Maureen just talked a lot about mold remediation and mold disinfectant. And sometimes our contractors don't really know how to properly do mold remediation. And so by educating yourself and sharing this with your neighbors and friends, you can also be aware of what they're doing. So you just want to be really vigilant in all of those different kind of categories. And then also on SBP's website, we have the Protect Yourself from Contractor Fraud module that goes into this like even more extensively. And with contractors too, I forgot to mention, you can ask them for references like of past clients that they worked with. If you're hiring somebody, you're probably going to ask for references, and you're hiring them for this, even if it's FEMA's money or insurance money. You want to ask for references to make sure that the past clients who worked with them would endorse them. One other thing that I feel like is really important is not to actually sign any contracts with them until you read the entire thing. But at SBP and our Rockaway office, clients would come all the time into the office and like just to sit down and write through their contract or read through their contract. I mean, and they would go through the whole 10 pages. They would just flip through it and then sign at the end. And although I would think like, okay, well, I'm glad that they trust us enough to want to just sign it. Absolutely not. Like we would stop them and go back to page 1 and just read through it with them to make sure that they understood what they were actually signing. And it's the same for this. It's so important that you're reading the details of what you're signing with everybody that you're working with. So we'll go on to the next one here. So just an overview of what I just mentioned. So we have spending the funds properly. So you're searching for reputable programs and organizations that may be able to provide free services in your area. So that's just the DIY stuff. Using your due diligence and good practices for working with a contractor. Rebuilding in a way that reduces future risks. 2 examples I give for there is, especially if it's on your ground level floor, if you had water cover over your electrical outlets while you have the walls open, like Maureen said, you want to open them up 6 inches. I think we actually even do, like, we could say even a foot. Once everything is open so that it's drying, why not elevate your electrical outlets another 6 inches or another foot up? It might look a little weird at first, but if some other water comes into your basement, which it may, now at least you won't have to spend the money to rough in all of that electrical work again. And that's really expensive stuff. So if you've mitigated it by elevating it very easily, just a few inches or a foot up, you will right there reduce your risk of future damage. And also with drywall, I am absolutely not a drywall expert, but there is a spectrum of drywall. So gray board is just the gray gypsum board that's in your living room and bedroom. That's your like run-of-the-mill drywall. Then there's green board, which is moisture resistant. It is not waterproof, it is moisture resistant. And that allows another level of protection against some moisture. And then there's purple drywall, which I think is fire resistant and moisture resistant. But your green board, that's what you would want to put in your bathrooms or kitchen, like backsplash in your kitchen or basement. And so that's really the level of drywall that you want to be replacing with if you can. And then of course, you're documenting everything and obtaining and maintaining flood insurance if you have it. Much of New York, coastal New York City is in a flood zone. And so we just highly recommend, if it's within your means to obtain flood insurance, definitely recommend that you get it. Okay, so I'm gonna just put this up here for a quick second. Like I mentioned, if you have other needs, 311 is a really great resource. They'll be able to connect you to the proper agencies. I have some FEMA phone numbers on here. And also at the very top, a resource for IDA recovery is newyorkcity.gov/IDA. And the NILAG New York Legal Assistance Group phone number is also on here. But again, we will be sending this out. My email here, there's a survey. But yeah, if you have questions, we can We'll pause for a minute and we'll do a Q&A session, but also I have my email here. So if you have a need to reach out to me directly, feel free. So with that, I will stop screen sharing here for a second. Cool. All right, we're back. And I just want to hand it over to my colleague, Jill Cornell. She comes from the New York City Emergency Management Office. Thank you so much, Jill, for being here. Jill is the Community Engagement Specialist. And so she's here to add a few words about what NISM is doing and what updates she might have for us. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Angela. Wow, I love learning new stuff about post-storm cleanup, and I certainly did today from both you and Maureen. I don't have a presentation. I am going to put a couple of things into the chat. I do want to build on some things that both Maureen and Angela said. So let me just add my links into the chat. I have 3 links in there. The first one is, you may have seen it come out earlier this week. It is either called the New Normal or the Weather Report, depending which news article you're reading. It comes from the mayor's office, and it outlines work from the task forces to address extreme weather in New York City, specifically extreme rainfall. I highly recommend that you all take a look at it. There's some very specific plans, some very big plans, some smaller plans, and New York City Emergency Management is featured prominently in there. So we will be very busy at our agency for the foreseeable future. The second link is for the IDA resource page from New York City. The third link, this goes under the shameless promotion category, is for our newsletter, the Community Preparedness Newsletter. As Angela mentioned, I'm a community engagement specialist. I work specifically in community preparedness. And to build on a couple of things, first I want to add to what Maureen said and what Angela touched on about lead, is to add there's another hazard that is specific to older dwellings and in basements, especially. You can see it on pipes, which is asbestos. And that removal is governed by the state. So any of you who may be homeowners, you may have heard about it, but that has to be done by an approved contractor. So I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you come across mold, and specifically in basements, it could be in floor tiles. It can be most commonly in the basement. It was in the basement of my house when I bought it, 20 some odd years ago. It's insulation wrapped around the pipes, right? So asbestos was used to retard fires, and then it was found to be toxic to humans and other beings. So it is, but it's most common in older places, and it gets disturbed by floodwaters. So it's very important to have an approved contractor come in and remove it. It has to be double bagged. They're wearing hazmat suits or protective garments when they come in. So that link from the state is in the chat. I just put that in there. And I know there are some rebuild experts here from our voluntary organizations who might want to address that. I saw Fareed there earlier. Richard certainly has had some experience with it. Our service centers are still active in 4 of the boroughs in New York City. So we encourage you to come. They are co-located with FEMA's disaster recovery centers. So it's really one-stop shopping. You can get assistance from the American Red Cross, from DSS, or SNAP benefits, et cetera. HPD is there. So we'd love to see you if you're having any trouble. If you hear of your neighbors who are having trouble, please send them to the local service center / FEMA disaster recovery center. And that is, again, can be found on the nyc.gov/IDA page, those locations. And finally, Angela touched on what you have to do if you get to reapply, if you get rejected by FEMA. And because I worked in the service center in Staten Island last week, I took a deep dive into this because I heard from Staten Islanders who had been rejected and were unsure of what to do. And our FEMA reps there said, read the whole letter. So the first sentence is going to say you've been denied. And then below, and then everybody freaks out. You read below and it tells you what you need to do to reapply. So this is really important. If they said that you didn't provide your social security number or your zip code was wrong, or most commonly that you didn't provide proof of insurance, proof that insurance turned you down, like you applied for your homeowner's insurance and they rejected the claim, they're going to ask for that. You have to make sure that that documentation is uploaded. So that's the most common thing. So we did get that information out to the Bull's Head community after I spoke to them, but that is straight from FEMA. You know, you can appeal, read your letter, look to see why they denied, and go ahead and reapply. So there's going to be so much information that comes out of our members here at New York City VOAD. Beth Malone is putting lots of stuff into the chat about different things about insurance and the homeowner mortgage issues. Those are going to come up big in the next year. So just keep coming to the meetings. The information is complicated. We're here to help. Both our NYC VOAD and the city, we're here to help and try to sort out. And if you have questions, that's what it's here for. So that's basically my pitch and I'm done. I know that people have a lot of questions, so I'm going to hand it over to Hannah. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jill. And thanks again, Maureen and Angela. You know, like we've mentioned, a lot of us come from Sandy backgrounds here, and really leveraging this expertise, I think is so critical to that. And like Jill said, we all are here for, I know I see names in here that I don't recognize, which is very good for all of you who are new to this world. As Jill said, we're here to support you and help you however you can, because these systems, as you've heard from Angela and from Jill, are really complicated, and the information can be a lot and overwhelming. So we're here to help support you. And I also just want to mention, before we move into the Q&A, that we have Kimberly Grisham and some of our female colleagues here. She's our voluntary agency liaison that can jump in and answer questions, as well as mentioned, experts that have a lot of experience, Beth Malone from Neighborhood Housing Services and some of our other colleagues. So I think we just really want to take some time to try to answer some questions, but I would say to, you know, jump in, those of you who have expertise and can lend some support or some critical knowledge to this conversation. So we're going to start out by answering a couple of questions that came through before the workshop. So I know I've got one related to health, and I think Richard has one related to housing recovery. So and then we're going to go through the chat and answer the questions. And if we have any additional time, we'll take some open questions. And at the end, the last 5 minutes, we're going to have an update from Zach. So the question that came through on our end is around mold. So we got a question, this is for you, Maureen, around someone who had mold in their basement. They cleaned it up. It seems like everything's good, but there's some residual staining from the mold. And the question is really around, should they be concerned about that? Does that mean the mold is still active?
I do want to answer that, and then I also wanted, but first I wanted to make a couple things. One about the asbestos. I put a link in there for facts and responsibilities for New York State with the asbestos control program. It's a little confusing because many materials you can't tell if they contain asbestos or not. So you could either email me and we can talk, or we can also, you can also contact the New York State Health Department about some of those questions, because it can be very confusing. That, and then also, if you have studs inside the walls, they may be metal or they may be, or more commonly, wood. Those can usually be cleaned off. If they're structurally sound, you don't need to remove those. They can usually be cleaned. Just so you're not, you know, you take the sheetrock off, but you don't necessarily need to remove the studs unless they're structurally unsound. So back to staining. That's a very common issue. I don't know if other people who don't live in rental units may not have the lovely off-white walls that I, as a renter, have, but that is, you do get staining from mold, and that is a reason to either, you can sometimes scrub it with a magic eraser, but that will take off the paint. You can also try to bleach it off, because it's not the mold itself, it's just the stain. You can actually use molds as dyes. You can buy wool that's stained with mold. So it does have a staining problem, and sometimes, or you can repaint. And probably in many cases, if it's dry, if it's been cleaned, if you're not getting recurrent mold growth, then you may just need to repaint. Oh, and thank you so much, Angela and Jill. I learned a lot, and it was really nice to work with Richard and Zach and Hannah too. They're really nice people.
Thanks, Maureen. Richard, did you have the question about resources?
Obviously, we've had quite a lot of content about homeowners, which is super helpful. But quite a lot of New Yorkers, especially in flood-prone areas, are renters, like Maureen. And so what is available assistance for renters who are in a flooded property? And what is in their hands, and what is best left to a landlord, and what if your landlord is unresponsive? Like, what are the pathways to recovery if you're a renter in a flooded unit?
So I can speak a little bit to it. And maybe there are other people on the call who have more experience with renters, but they definitely have the ability to apply for FEMA, like I mentioned, and SBA. And they have the rental assistance program at FEMA. So we would definitely recommend that renters apply for that and reach out to them. And then with SBA too, if you're a renter, you might be able to receive some assistance there. I don't know if there's anybody else on the call who maybe has more knowledge about that, but those are the two venues that I would say would be a good start for a renter.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know I know a lot of folks who are renters have missed out on things because they didn't think anything was available to them. So thank you. So we're going to go ahead and move through the chat. Richard, I think our first question was from Neighborhood Housing Services, which is probably Laura.
Yeah, Laura McKenna of Neighborhood Housing Services, and also the co-chair of the Southern Brooklyn Community Organization's Active in Disaster, asked a question about if you have porous flooring in a flooded basement, so a dirt floor, which is actually fairly common, or something else that isn't as easily washed as polished concrete or epoxied concrete or sealed tile. So I think that's probably more in Maureen's wheelhouse, but Angela, if you've got words on dirt floor mold as well, that would be great.
I can start. That was a fascinating question, and thank you for asking it. A lot of problems with dirt floors. Even if it's pretty beaten down, they get wet. They're really hard to clean. You might get more pests. Even if it's pretty hard, it's easier for rodents to get in and other things. It also keeps it more humid. And there's going to be a case-by-case variation on whether there's ventilation, increased ventilation. So if you have something like a crawl space with dirt, it's recommended that you have some sort of vent. If it's could vent to the outside or something, so you have some sort of airflow, because you do get increased humidity. If it's a stone wall basement or brick, it's probably a little less of a problem, but if it's wood, you can get increased dry rot. So it might be a good time to consider putting a more cleanable, sustainable basement in place. It's other than scraping it off, and even then, it's going to be really hard to clean. You're going to have bacteria, you're going to have microorganisms. In some ways, it's awesome because you have nature right there, but in some ways, it's not so good because you also have things that may, make people sick, and certainly for mold, many molds live in soil. They're called soil molds, and you're going to have increased humidity, increased conditions for mold growth. Another problem that I do want to mention, which is not related to mold, but because it's a dirt floor, you also are at greater risk for soil vapor intrusion. Depending on where you live in the city, there are a lot of areas where there has been past industrial use or present industrial use from something like a dry cleaner or a gasoline station or refrigerants or other things. Many of these chemicals get into the groundwater and then get into the soil vapor. So they're right beneath the foundation and then even in the soil, and then they can off gas into your home. And those are things like petroleum. It was recently banned, but something called tetrachloroethylene or PERC, which was used in dry cleaners, and it is a carcinogen and it can get into your home. We routinely test for that. It's not in people's homes. The state does do that sometimes, but basically the recommendation would be to cover that floor. So if people could maybe cover the floor, that would be good. With something that's more cleanable. It's a tough problem. I know a lot of people have that, but if they could afford to put something else down, that would be great.
Thanks, Maureen. I think the next one, Richard, was Lauren, which I feel like might have been answered in the chat, but do we want to go ahead and do that one?
It's a question about expedited assistance for people who have disabilities, access, functional needs, and I think there was some specific advice for the specific situation that's listed there, but just in general, expedited assistance for people living with disabilities.
Yeah, FYI, I was chatting with Lauren privately, and she's a resident of Rockland County. So I am referring her to Rockland County resources, but I think it's a great question for New York City too, that we should be addressing. And so I have it on my ever expanding list of questions for my supervisors. So I really appreciate Lauren bringing up the issue because it is something that is paramount on all of us, and some of our members of New York City VOAD do expedited services to New York City residents. So we appreciate that being kept on the forefront of everybody's mind.
Yeah, thank you.
Christian from FEMA too. I just wanted to say that yes, when people register, they should include in their application if they do have any access and functional needs. And if any damages in particular were to items in the home that they are reliant on for their health and safety.
Thanks, Cam. Really. Let's see what's up next. I think it's great. Some of these questions, it looks like, are being answered in the real time in the chat, which is awesome. But there was, I think Beth had a question about debris removal. Do you want to go ahead and just reiterate what was going on in the chat bar?
Well, yeah, I had heard about something called crisis cleanup. I don't know who they are. I haven't gotten the sufficient information, but I am getting calls from people who are, and they said to call 311. What happens when you call 311? Can Jill illuminate that?
Yes, 311 gets updated scripts from our agency and other city agencies so that when people use certain terms, they get it shoots them over to a particular script. So somebody calls up, they say, I have some trash that needs to come up. I was affected by the flooding from Ida. That activates a script and that can shoot them over to getting cleanup from the citywide cleanup corps, which is different from crisis cleanup. And I know Zach's going to talk about that in a minute,
Oh, okay.
but it's our citywide cleanup corps has been diverted into Ida cleanup specifically, and they get targeted and they work in specific boroughs and certain neighborhoods and have been there for the last few weeks doing debris removal. So there are all these different stages. First thing you do is have to physically get the debris from the apartment or basement or for ground floor onto the street so that sanitation can pick it up. And I'm sure you've seen some of our infographics. We've done so many tons of debris removal already, but we know that there are still folks affected, and that's why they call 311. That's the most expedited way to get help.
Do they need to schedule with sanitation or notify sanitation?
No, sanitation is still honoring.
Just on the sidewalk. 'Cause
Yeah,
somebody
yes.
said, I had somebody complain they got a ticket. So I'll just tell them to fight,
They
to
should fight the
challenge
ticket.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they were in the flooded basement. I mean, obviously I'll double check on that too, because I don't want to give bad information. I know that was happening for the first few weeks after the flood, but I'll check
Oh,
and make
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, but I didn't see any notice that they had stopped.
Yeah, me either. Thanks.
Okay.
Just one extra question. 311 calls, if 311 can be frustrating. It was worse before when you had to have private numbers for every agency, but it's still kind of cumbersome. So it's good if you can give really clear instructions on what you're looking for. So cleanup after Ida might be different than if you say mold. Then you might get transferred to the health department, and we can't help you clean up. So we've gotten a lot of calls where they're misdirected, and then we have to transfer people back. We may not have the number ourselves, so then we have to transfer people back to 311, or we have to have them call 311 back. We can't
That's
transfer.
right.
We get calls from 311, but we can't transfer back to 311. So if people can be as clear as possible with their questions, it'll be less frustrating.
Thank you. I think, no, tell me if you see anything, Richard. It seems like a lot of the questions, and I would encourage folks to, if you have a second, to kind of look at the chat bar. It looks like there's a lot in there that's helpful, but I do see that someone had a question about the PowerPoints that will be available. I know, Richard, can you tell the folks about the exciting new social media resource you all have at VOAD and how some of this will be available after the meeting?
Well, I believe we will be able to send out the slides, but this meeting will live in perpetuity on New York City VOAD's new YouTube channel, which I should throw a link to that into the chat. I have just put in the 311 website and a recommendation for the smartphone app. If the phone line is busy or it's frustrating to deal with, you can do it all digitally if that is easier for you and you have access to those things, which if you're on a Zoom meeting right now, you probably do. So I'll dig out the YouTube link and put that there as well. And in the meantime, because we only have very few minutes left, I'm going to turn this over to Zach Hodgson, co-chair of New York City VOAD, to wrap things up.
Can I throw in just one more thing before we do that? I'm going to put my information in the chat bar, and if folks do again, but I just want to tell people if they have follow-up questions, you can reach out to us. Basically, if you can find any of us as a part of this presentation, you can reach all of us because we all can connect with whoever can best answer the questions. So thanks.
Yeah, I would also say that I could not chat back to the person who asked the question about the dirt floors. But if you have specific questions, please email me. That can be a whole range of issues and we can discuss. Thanks.
All right, Zach, thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much to Maureen, to Hannah, to Angela, to Jill, even to Richard, for their contributions to the morning. It's a lot of information. It was a lot of good information, but it's a lot of information. And experience tells me that that information is going to shift a lot over the next weeks and months and years. So we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best to communicate what we know to support recovery from this storm. I will say just this week that New York City VOAD launched a Tropical Storm Ida long-term recovery group, and that already has working groups for case management. It already has a working group for housing, for unmet needs. I'm sure that list will grow because there's a great need right now. But if you put your contact information in the chat, if you're not already on our distribution list, you are now. So please look for emails from us to announce those meetings as they come. Please participate as you can. New York City VOAD's contribution to the recovery of New York City is only as good as your engagement with these things. I'll just say, despite us meeting again in the midst of another disaster in New York City, I'm encouraged by this morning and by the existing expertise and the existing partnerships and the greater integration of citywide and government and nonprofit and local community emergency networks that we enter this recovery with, which maybe is I know is a vast improvement from where we've entered others, and I'm encouraged by that. But continue to participate in it. As my colleagues from FEMA would tell me, we need a whole community to recover. So please continue to be part of that community. I'm gonna take off the recording, but leave the meeting on for a couple minutes. So if you've not had a chance to put your contact information in the chat, please do that. But otherwise, I'm going to wrap it there. And thanks so much again for all who contributed. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Zach.